This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program Living Legends collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interview was conducted by Mrs. Mary B. Roberts. The interviewee is Mrs. P. A. Thompson of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The lady's first name is Marynette, Marynette, Marynette. This interview is being re-recorded on September the 18th, 1987 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Testing. This is Mary Roberts on an interview with Mrs. P. A. Thompson, Marynette Thompson. Testing.
Excellent.
The next voice that you hear will be that of Mrs. Thompson, Thompson. She lives here in Oklahoma City at 1410 Camden Way. She's a long-time resident of the place, and her father and her mother, but her father, one of the very early day doctors, has a story worth telling. The next voice you hear will be that of Marynette.
This is Marynette Ross Thompson. Now, what do you want to say?
Not correctly. My father's full name is.
Oh, my father's full name was Samuel Price Ross. He was a native of Missouri, the son of a Confederate veteran who served in the Confederate Army under, who did he? Oh, General Price. He was named, whom he was named for.
And he was named for
General Price, Sterling Price. Now.
Your father came to Oklahoma after his. Your father came to Oklahoma after this. After his medical career had already started. He was already a student of medicine and had owned drugstores in Houston and Dallas, and then came to Indian Territory. That sounds like an adventuresome young man to me.
He was. In 1902, he came to Caney, Indian Territory, in the Choctaw Nation.
Was he married at that time?
Oh, yes.
What was your mother's name, Marynette?
Maud Barnes.
Maud Barnes, Barnes.
Nes. And her father was also a physician in Bonham, Texas.
In Bonham. And he brought his bride with him then and came to Caney. She wasn't a bride, though.
No. You mean my father?
Uh-huh.
No, I was about 9 years old.
Oh, excuse me. So he also brought Marynette.
Yes.
Okay.
My mother was terribly afraid of the Indians, and when my father and I would be asleep at night, she would sit up with a shotgun across her knees and watch out the window for fear the Indians might scalp us.
She really was afraid. Your father had no fear of them.
Oh, no, none whatever. He made friends with them readily, and one in particular, old Abel Lewis, who was a self-appointed assistant to the doctor and collector. And my mother wanted to show her appreciation, so she gave him an ostrich tip to wear in the band of his hat.
Went off of her hat, I guess.
Yes, in place of an old chicken feather he had sticking up. Well, Abel misinterpreted that and thought she was in love with him. So the next day he brought his squaw
Great big fat one, I guess.
into town and rode up and called Licksha Ross, which was Dr. Ross, And
Lickshaw
Lickshaw stood for doctor. And he said, me bring him Lickshaw Ross my squaw. Me take him Lickshaw Ross's squaw. She says she loved me. She give me a feather. Daddy said, you damn fool. She didn't know what she was doing, and she did. You go take your squaw and go on home.
Well, what did that do to your mother if she was already sitting up
Oh.
nights? It must have
She wouldn't even answer the front door. Just,
panicked.
just panicked.
Well,
Then,
that was a hard experience, sure enough.
then another time, Abel Lewis came in to get my father to go out to see a girl who had been poisoned. A Negro medicine man had just gathered herbs and stewed them and put in a jug, and he traded that jug of herbs, poisonous herbs, for a pony, an Indian pony. And Abel came after Daddy, and when they got out there, the girl was dead. And my father said, that damn so-and-so ought to be killed. Well, the next day, Abel rode up. They never would come into the house, nor come inside of the yard. They would drive up in front and then call, holler, low, low, and when you answered. So Abel said, was leading the pony, and he said, me get him, me kill him.
Because he gave that.
Well, because my father had said he ought to be killed.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't dare.
Meaning.
They took everything literally.
Mm-hmm. And your father, because of the poison herb, he had made that as an exclamation.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh,
So,
how awful.
Daddy said, you damn fool, you go on home and shut up. Don't you tell anybody or they'll put both of us in the pain. Oh.
And your mother, when she came out, she brought with her the culture and the refinement from her schools that she had attended before she came.
Well, she was 14 when they moved to Bonham, Texas from Kentucky, from Hodgenville, Kentucky. And her father had a nice practice there. But there was no boarding school for a girl, and she was ready for college. So they sent her to Sherman, to Carbondette College in Sherman, Texas. And she graduated from there, had a musical education, and also was quite an artist.
Then she brought with her the early culture from her home,
Yes,
even to the Indian Territory.
that's right, uh-huh. Then we moved back to Texas, and then came back to Indian Territory at the call of the coal mining companies. They wanted a young doctor, so they paid my father a salary, and he came back and had charge of the practice for the 3 mines, Pittsburgh, Savannah, and Chambers mines. And then in 1911, we moved to Ada. I had graduated from college, and they decided that it was time to go to a little larger place. So we moved to Ada, and they lived there until his retirement, and he was all up in his 90s then. And then from Ada, they came up here to live with my husband and me, and each of them, each my father and my mother, lived to be 98 years old.
That's remarkable. In his practice with the Indians, did he find any difficulty with the medicine men of the Indians? Did they easily accept him?
That we never even contacted nor heard. We didn't contact the one who killed the girl. But they didn't come into the town. The medicine men wouldn't come into the towns. They went out to the cabins and traded with the Indians. But the Indians would come into town on payday when their allotments were due, and we had to store all alcoholic medicines, such as Peruna, and or they would buy it, and of course that was against the law. And the grocery stores had to store all of their lemon extract, or they'd buy that and drink it. So when they couldn't get anything else to treat with and to enjoy, they would buy Hoyt's German cologne, which sold for 25 cents a bottle, and go out on the street, on the curb where all the Indians were sitting, and pour it on each of them so they'd smell good.
Did you have any schooling at all in Oklahoma, in any of the small towns?
I had a governess.
Governess.
Meta Pickens. She taught for years and years later at Afton, Oklahoma. And her husband was a young physician, and my father got him to come over from Arkansas and help him with his practice. And they lived with us, and Mrs. Pickens was a young school teacher, and she was my governess. And I had the pleasure of entertaining her in my home about 10 years ago. She has one son, and he lives in Tulsa and is an attorney there.
Marynette, were there any women's clubs early organized?
Oh, yes.
Maybe even before the ones that you belonged to in Oklahoma City. Do you remember any in Ada or any?
My mother belonged to the Eastern Star. My father was a 32nd degree Mason at McAllister. Oh, it would be in about 1909 and 10. And Mama belonged to the UDC chapter in McAllister. Kiowa was only 17 miles south of McAllister. And then, of course, she was the organist in the church. And we only had one church building in the little town of Kiowa. But she was organist one Sunday it would be Methodist, the next Sunday Baptist, the next Sunday Presbyterian, and the next Sunday maybe the Carmelites. And Mama was organist at the church for all of them. And she was quite active in the Eastern Star and all of the clubs in McAllister.
Were there any libraries, or where did you get your reading materials and things?
In McAllister. Mm-hmm.
Were there newspapers that?
We had a little paper in our town, the Kiowa Chronicle. And the daughter of the editor was one of my very dear friends, and she lived and died right here in Oklahoma City the later years of her life. E. Marie Anderson, and she was a fine musician and taught dramatic art.
It amazes me how much the
Culture.
art and culture
Yes.
that came through in these very, very early years. The china in your home and the ceramics, was that your interest in that?
I
studied. Your mother
studied china painting in Cotty College at Nevada, Missouri, and then have continued keeping up my china painting. Then I took the ceramics right here in Oklahoma City about 20 years ago. I started doing that.
Your mother went in more for oil painting?
Altogether oil painting. She and my daughter both. And Mama did watercolors too, but I think I did one pastel and one oil, but I preferred china.
You do beautiful work. I'm glad I own own a little bit of it. The picture over your mantle, wasn't that when you were a child?
No, that my mother painted that from John G. Whittier's Barefoot Boy, just from the poem.
Well, I thought that was.
The one in the living room is me when I was 9 months old.
That's what I thought now.
Yes, that was me. And when my father had the drugstore in Houston, they had a brand of cigars named our Marynette, our baby. And my picture was on the lid, taken from that picture that Mama had painted. They had made a picture of that and had on the inside lid of every cigar box.
I didn't know you were such a famous person. What brand do you use now?
And you know I don't even smoke cigarette now.
But that is that picture.
That is, painted in, I was 9 months old. It was painted in 1893.
And they used it as an advertisement at the top of the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Back to your father and his Indian practice. Could the Indian help, just across the board, was the Indian help good, you'd say, or fair?
Oh, no indeed.
Poor?
No indeed. Very poor. The death rate was very high. Tuberculosis was the main thing that killed them. They were undernourished.
That was what caused it.
They didn't know how to raise vegetables and things of that kind. Oh, and many a time the doctor, this famous old Abel Lewis, in collecting, if somebody moved off of his farm, Abel would just take over the whole field of corn. And Daddy always kept 2 hired men to take care of his horses, and he had all of his practice was done in Caney in a buggy. He had a buggy and 2 horses that he drove, and many a time Mom and I would have to take the hired men out to these fields for them to gather corn. That would be the way we would be paid. We were paid in cows and hogs and horses and corn.
So you had farm whether you wanted it or not.
That's right.
No wonder you had to keep 2 men and give it up. I started to ask about how he was paid, what the wampum was.
Yeah, mostly in things that we could turn. Cattle, horses, corn, and I don't think anything but corn probably, and hogs, things of that sort.
They didn't know how to grow very much.
Oh, no, no.
That was in their transition period after the buffalo.
Well,
Did pretty well.
the buffalo were not down in our section. The buffalo were up in the northern part of the state.
So these Indians then probably just were undernourished because they never had.
That particular little town of Caney is where now the government is trying to do what California did some time ago. They are trying to make vineyards and take these itinerant farmers and put them on there to raise grapes.
Yeah. You think that soil is adaptable?
They say that is very.
You think then that project might really be the thing that's going to.
Well, I don't know whether it will work or not. I know I read in the paper where so many of those farmers think that they have been mistreated and promised things that the government is not giving them. I think the main trouble is they don't want to work.
Do you think that the Indian of today has advanced in his general living conditions
yes.
and his status?
Oh, yes. You don't find any of those old-time Indians anymore in our state.
Were they the blanket Indians?
No, no. The blanket Indians were from the western part.
Mm-hmm.
See, this was all from the eastern part of the state.
They were-
McAllister and Kiowa, Atoka, Caney, Caddo.
Then they were Kiowas and
No, they were Choctaws,
Choctaw.
Cherokees, Chickasaws, and up around Muskogee they had a lot of creeks, but we didn't have any. Ours were principally Choctaws and Chickasaws.
Mm-hmm.
They called it the Choctaw Nation.
Yes, I remember
Hmm.
that. How were they dressed for the most part? Just
Oh, just in kind of Mother Hubbards.
mm-hmm.
Now the men wore suits
Mm-hmm.
of that time.
Whatever they could get.
Just whatever they could get. And I don't know, but I imagine the government, I don't remember that, the government probably furnished their clothing.
Was there an agency at that time?
Yes. And McAllister had a number of very prominent men who were supposed to have taken care of all Indian affairs.
Mm-hmm. Were the Indians in their allotments that they got? Were they swindled very much by the?
I don't know that the allotments came in to the banks and they went in to get their pay, so much per head. No, I don't think they had an opportunity there. They were swindled mostly in land and things that they owned like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they had of course, I've always been very sympathetic with the Indians, having watched how poorly they were taken care of and how many rich men in McAllister got extremely rich. Yes.
Was your father in any way connected with the agency? Did
No.
they use him as a doctor?
No, none whatever. He was employed by the mining companies, and principally the Dow Coal Company.
Mm-hmm. Were there any accidents or anything?
Oh, burns, severe burns. He was famous for his treatment of burns.
Really?
In the mines, so many explosions in the mines. Now, the Indians did not work in the mines very much. We had mostly Italians in the mining camps.
Well, the Indians just didn't adapt to that.
Well,
type of work.
no, and they're lazy.
They
They were lazy.
their health was so poor too.
Well, it was malnutrition, I think.
I imagine.
Hmm.
What can you remember any special disaster or explosion or anything that?
Yes, at
What year?
at Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh mines, there were a number of explosions, and I don't recall any deaths down in the mines, but at Phillips around Lehigh and Colgate, they had a lot of tragedies. And I remember one old gentleman who lived at Caney. He was an attorney and had been sent down from the government. He had a son working in the coal mine over at Lehigh, and he went over to see his son. Well, the little coal car going into the mine, one side there was standing room, the other side was almost against the wall, and this old gentleman got over on the wrong side, the narrow side, and was crushed. Yes, we had a lot of tragedies in the coal mines.
Did they in their mining? Did they have any difficulties with the fire within the mine?
Yes.
Or
Yes, a lot of explosions in the inside of the
just
mine.
not able to handle?
Hmm.
Which was the largest one that you remember?
I believe the one over at Pittsburgh, Oklahoma. That is just a few miles from Kiowa. Well,
By what date, approximately?
that must have been around 1909-10. We had a number of people from the east who came in to Pittsburgh, to that little town, and some of them are very prominent. I know one very prominent man in McAllister, Ed Mountjoy, who came from Kentucky. And he was just a young man right out of school when he came. But he has made very good.
In mining?
In working for the mining companies, yes.
That explosion is the one then that you would say was outstanding
Mm-hmm.
in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Was it anything that could have been prevented by better?
I don't know. I don't know what caused it.
About how many were?
Oh, I don't know that either. I remember my father being up about 48 hours without any sleep. He was completely exhausted from taking care of them. The mining companies took good care of the miners' families, and the families were well cared for. I do remember that. The children were well clothed and in school.
Are there any other stories that you remember of your early girlhood and your adaptation to this new Indian Territory country, or the adaptation of your mother?
Well, I have just had a very pleasant experience this summer. Two of the families who were children when I was a child in Caney have visited me this summer. And they've been very successful men in Houston, Texas. One is one of the officers, head men of the Gulf Oil Company. And another one worked for Howard Hughes. And when this cousin of mine who worked for Howard Hughes was retired, they gave him his office, told him he was retired from actual work, but that was his office. He could come in any day he wanted to and stay as long as he wanted to.
So he still has a
And yes, so he and his wife, and then the one with the Gulf Oil Company and his wife, both have visited me this month. Drove up from Houston.
I would like to have listened in on the memories that you had then, and you talked.
They were wonderful.
I'm sure.
One of these boys, I remember Alry Hardy. His mother had, I believe, 5 children, and she taught a little country school. Her husband was an attorney, had been sent down here from Washington, and she would take those little children up on the horse back of her and ride 5 miles to this little schoolhouse to teach school.
How many miles?
5 miles. 5 miles was as much as 50 to us in a car now.
There was a club meeting at your house that I got wind of at one time. In fact, I think I was a guest at one time, called the Ready to Help Club. That sounded quite interesting to me, and the ladies that I met were people who seemed to me like all of them had backgrounds of early Oklahoma. Is that right?
We have just celebrated this spring our 70th anniversary. So far as I know, it's the oldest charity club in the state of Oklahoma. We sponsored for years when we needed to help children in school so badly. We sponsored the horse shows, the polo game, benefit bridges, did everything we could to make, and we made lots of money off of it. I happened to be president when we made over $1,000 on one horse show, just for our part. And I hope that we can go on to the 75th year. We also, at our spring party, we entertained the junior Ready to Help group, who was started with the daughters of the senior club. And the announcement came out in the paper one evening that we were celebrating our 70th anniversary at Discoveries with a luncheon for the junior group. And the telephone rang, and a lady said, Mrs. Thompson, I just read that you were having a luncheon. I want to tell you I was one of the 5 little girls who organized that club. And her name is she's a Mrs. Conn, C-O-H-N, here in Oklahoma City.
And you lost track until she...
I never had heard of her before. I did know the club had been organized by 5 little schoolgirls, and their mothers were sponsors. And they did it to help needy children. And our project has always been to dress and take care of needy.
And you lost track until she...
I never had heard of her before. I did know the club had been organized by 5 little schoolgirls, and their mothers were sponsors. And they did it to help needy children. And our project has always been to dress and take care of needy school children.
Who was your first sponsor? Who was it that helped you get together on it?
Well, it just continued. It just grew from those 5 little schoolgirls. It never has...
Did one of the mothers or somebody?
Yes, their mothers helped them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I didn't go in till about 30 years ago into the club.
You're practically a new member.
Oh, yes. We have 89ers in that club. Frida Law, she was Frida Reed, and she was brought into the state, into Oklahoma Territory, into Oklahoma City in the run of '89, a babe in arms, and she is now treasurer of our club.
Do you have any others?
Yes, we have Mrs. Miller, Carrie Miller.
Do you know her maiden?
I don't know her maiden name.
She was an 89.
And there was there's Mary Leeming, Mary Dietrich Leeming. She was
D-E-I.
T-H-R-I-C.
And the last name?
Leeming, L-E-A-M-I-N-G.
And these all came in on the run. With
Those were originals, and we just lost one, Nellie Scott, who also.
She was one we were playing the interview.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. What were some of the projects that you have helped on with your money that you've earned?
Oh, our main project has always been to help needy children. I have personally taken carloads, go to Old Washington School, pick up a carload of little children, and take down to the stores, outfit them from head to toe. And mostly they always needed shoes.
I knew that your club had also been listed as one of the early ones to begin the horse shows here.
We sponsored the first horse show, and of course, our benefit came from a percentage. Uh-huh. Of course, we got out and sold tickets too. We earned our money.
Well, as these girls grew up and married, were the husbands as congenial and were they as enthusiastic about this as you girls were? How has it lasted so long?
They certainly were, and on all of now our benefit bridges, we took care of ourselves, but we had to have a great deal of help from the husbands on the horse shows. Now we have right now some of the men, the Anthony boys, were sponsors of the horse shows, and we worked right along with them. Just a number of men here in town, our businessmen. And the polo game, Dr. G.A. Nichols, we didn't have a stadium or any place to sit, so he sent from the lumber yard some horses and planks and set up for the spectators to watch the polo game. Yes, wooden horses.
And put the planks across them.
And planks.
And that was your grandstand.
That was our grandstand.
About how many would you have?
Oh, we made around, I think, $500 on that. And then the big horse show out at the stockyards, we made over $1,000 for our part on that, for the club part. And then when the Biltmore Hotel was first built, we gave a benefit bridge there, and that $1,000, and then we made $900 on the benefit bridge, and I happened to be president both times. So I missed my calling. I should have been a promoter.
A $1,000 girl of some kind. Marynette, we'd like to have one good story now to close this off with, and then I want to tell them about this write-up on your father.
One time when we lived at Caney in the beginning, my father was called out one night, and there was George Perkins. He was not an Indian. He was married to an Indian, and he gathered up a group of Indians, and as my father was riding back home into town, they formed a line across the road and wouldn't let him go through. They weren't going to let him go through. They resented a physician being in the town. They didn't want one. And Daddy just turned around a little bit in his saddle, put his hand on his hip, and he said, now if you want anything, I'll give it to you. And with that, he rode right between them. He said he knew he didn't dare turn his back or they'd shoot him. So he did not have a gun. He didn't have any protection at all, but he frightened them enough that they let him go through the line.
I know there's other stories that we could get, Marynette, but I want this newspaper clipping read. If you're familiar with it, I'm going to ask you to read it.
Oh. Pioneering as a doctor and druggist in early days of Savannah and Kiowa was Dr. Samuel Price Ross, whose story is told in A History of Oklahoma, published by Luther B. Hill in 1909. Dr. Ross was the son of Samuel H. Ross, who was a member of General Price's staff during the Civil War, serving as quartermaster in the Missouri District of the Confederate Service. Dr. Ross was born in Mason City, Missouri on November the 14th, 1863. He obtained his first schooling in Montague, Texas, and in 1881 began medical studies at Gainesville. That consisted of washing bottles in the back of the drugstore. He was just a young teenager, we call them now, and they didn't have a new bottle for every medicine, but people would bring the old bottles in, and that was what he did there. He later matriculated at the St. Louis School of Pharmacy. He had drugstores in Ravenna, Texas, and Houston, Texas, and for several years before continuing his medical education at Tulane University in New Orleans and the medical department of the University of Texas. His last two courses of lectures were taken at the University of Baylor University in Dallas, from which he was graduated March the 18th, 1902. While a student in Dallas, Dr. Ross was enabled to enjoy actual practice according to the account, his experience being gained among the Choctaw Indians while he was temporarily located at Caney. He was the first white man to practice medicine among the full-blood Indians. All right. He was the first white man to practice medicine among the full-blood Indians of this nation, and in a way, it decided his future career. Before locating in Indian Territory, however, he served for some time with the Dallas City Hospital. He came to the Choctaw Nation and opened his first office in Savannah. At that point, had charge of a large practice among the miners for nearly 4 years. In 1905, he removed to Kiowa, where he resumed practice, also bought the Palace Drug Store. The doctor is a member of the County and State Medical Society and American Medical Association, also being local surgeon for the MK&T Railroad. Interested in the substantial growth of the town, Dr. Ross has erected one of the most comfortable residences in the locality, has contributed largely to...
Now, where is this print?
Kiowa. Yeah, we're still in Kiowa.
Yeah.
In 1911, he moved to Ada, Oklahoma, and from there, I've given you, I think, all of that.
All right. And what is the heading on this article? I notice it's...
Pioneer Kiowa Doctor, featured in the history book printed in 1909.
And do you have a copy of that book?
Yes, I do.
Who is it by? Do you remember?
Yeah, wait just a minute, right here, I can tell you.
I just wondered who was writing then.
Luther B. Hill published it in 1909.
And you have a copy of that book. Well, thank you so much, Marynette. This has been lots of fun, along with many other hours that I've had with you.
Well, I hope we have many more.
Well, thank you, and I do too. And if you think of the postscript to be put on this, why, I'm only a few blocks away now. And since I don't get back out to the office, why, my machine will be right here, where you can add your postscript when you want to.
That is fine.
Thank you so much, dear. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Sure enough, we did get that postscript. Marynette's thought of some more things, and I'm going to ask her a few questions and get her just briefly to tell us a little bit about some of these things. Marynette has a family all her own that we forgot to mention. And for you genealogical fans, I know you'll want to know about Mr. Phillip Thompson.
My daughter is Mrs. J.H. Beerley of Roswell, New Mexico. Her husband is Colonel Beerley, who is with the New Mexico Military Academy, and their daughter is Carol, a senior in high school.
Her daughter's name was Margaret, wasn't it?
My daughter's name is
that
Margaret.
was Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us how you met Phillip. Isn't that your husband's name, Phillip?
Mm-hmm. Well, when we moved to Ada, the train got in about 11 o'clock in the morning. I had stayed in Kiowa to do some collecting for my father, and my mother and father had gone on over and started housekeeping in Ada. And when I got there, Mother called me, though, and told me to be sure and bring an evening dress because I was going to a dance that night after I got there. And I had a date with a young man, Phillip Thompson. I had never met any of the young people of Ada. And we went to the dance that night, and the girls asked me how I liked him, and I said, he's very nice, but he can't dance. 4 years later, I married Phillip Thompson.
So that's how it started. And then Margaret, and she has one little daughter or two.
Margaret was married was born in Ada. And when she was 4 years old, Phillip and I moved to Oklahoma City, and he was sales manager for the Ideal Cement Company, which is now the Ideal Basic of Denver, Colorado. We had just one. Margaret and Bud had just one own child. Carol is their own. They had a little adopted girl, and she is married to John Valiant and lives here in Oklahoma City.
There's one other question that I thought I'd like to ask. You do such beautiful ceramics work. You said you began that in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. Where did you learn it here?
I studied with Keating Donahoe in Oklahoma City. And, of course, ceramics didn't come in until recent years.
Yes. You were one of his first then.
Well, among
one of his first people. This question that I had now is, if you think of something about your early impression of Caney and of Kiowa. For instance, the little street when you walked down the little town.
We had nothing but dirt roads. We didn't have sidewalks. We didn't have pavement of any kind.
Did you have hitching posts for your horses?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And Bob was my father's favorite buggy horse, old Bob. And we took Bob to Ada with us.
The streets, about how businesses began in the early days. Of course, they were the ones that supplied the needs of the people. About what kind of businesses did they have?
They had a general store, a mercantile store.
What did they have in the general store?
Dry goods on one side of the store and groceries on the other.
Horse collars?
No, we had a regular livery stable, and they handled all of the equipment for the animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've gone to the wrong place here. Do you remember how many stores and businesses they had?
We had 2 banks in Kiowa. We had two banks. We had 2 drugstores. We had one general mercantile store. And we had a butcher shop, a real old-fashioned butcher shop. And I remember distinctly my mother sending me to the butcher shop one day for 25-cent round steak. Well, the butcher, old Bill, said, we don't have any round steak today. And I was very fond of liver. I said, well, just give me a quarter's worth of liver. There were a number of old-timers sitting around, men, and they all just laughed. And one of them said, little girl, you couldn't carry a quarter's worth of liver home, but we'll give you all you want. And now it's $1.25
The good, the good old days.
$1.25 a pound now. For a pound now.
uh, what do you remember of the social life? You mentioned the dance. Uh, the social life of that town, and that time. Uh, and something. Do you remember anything about the styles that your mother wore and that you wore?
Yes, I have now some of Mama's clothes. I have a black taffeta skirt that has never split one bit, and it is put together with a faggoting stitch. Uh, Rows of taffeta and faggoted to the next row. It's a semi-train, and the ladies wore shirt, waists, and skirts principally. Oh, and I do remember that for every day around the house they wore what they called dressing sacks.
I remember those too.
Yes.
And what was your dance dress? What was it like?
I don't remember. I'm sure, though, that it was either a chiffon or a satin, because that's about all we had in evening dresses then. And I don't remember what. It was long, though, I'll assure you that.
I'm sure it was too. Well, thank you for the postscript, Marynette. I felt like that this would add a little bit better to more to your family tree too on it, and the genealogical people always want that. So thank you again.
No.
Signing off, Mary Roberts and Mrs. P.A. Thompson, Marynette.